Imagine a legal system where laws are shared globally. So if America passes a law, that same law is enforced in France. If Bangladesh passes a law, it's enforced in Nigeria. If China passes a law, it's enforced right here in the United States. The strictest standard for speech becomes the global norm, and global law basically decided by the most repressive state. That may sound like science fiction, but this is actually already happening to an extent. And if this isn't stopped soon, the full weight of that scenario is going to become a global reality. Now, some of this takes the form of censorship. Back in August 2024, riots broke out in the UK after a 17-year-old man went on a stabbing spree at a children's dance class and murdered 3 children. People were naturally outraged. Rumors spread online that the 17-year-old man was a migrant, but that was called fake news because, look, while his parents were from Rwanda, he was born in Wales. Online comments against this second-generation migrant were framed as dangerous hate speech by the British government, and the head of police even threatened to jail Americans who were not even physically in the UK over comments they wrote on the internet. London Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley stated,
"We will throw the full force of the law at people, and whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you."
Now that was met with serious backlash, and of course, no Americans were extradited to face charges in the UK. But American businesses, and even business leaders, they're not so lucky. The European Commission has been exporting laws and its own definition of hate speech and disinformation. And this is having a couple pretty serious effects. Now, on one side, it's bringing massive fines to American platforms. For example, X, an American social network, they were hit with a $140 million fine. That's about 6% of the company's global revenue, because they're accused of failing to govern free speech under European standards. And its owner, Elon Musk, he's still challenging those charges. But it's not just X. It's actually most large platforms that let people post their own content. The House Judiciary Committee wrote a report in February 2026 saying that over the last 6 years, the European Commission has had more than 100 closed-door meetings to pressure platforms to censor. This includes censoring political information. It even includes censoring information that's completely true. And the report noted that companies are pressed to, quote, more aggressively censor content and directly infringe on Americans' online speech in the United States. Now, some in Europe want to take this even further. Spain, for example, they're even saying they want to go after the heads of US companies directly if they refuse to follow their foreign content laws. And while we may often think of illegal online content as being things like advocating for violence, well, that's not really the case, at least not in Europe. A member of parliament from Finland, that's Päivi Räsänen, she told US Congress she was charged for posting a Bible verse on Twitter. But look, it's not just Europe carrying out transnational censorship. It's actually global. Countries including Brazil, India, a lot of others, they've actually been pushing American platforms to censor on their behalf. There are also just massive foreign fines. US tech companies have already paid out tens of billions of dollars in fines to just European governments because they're accused of violating foreign laws on issues like how user data is stored, how ads are displayed, and for other technical issues. Now, some, like Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, they've actually framed these fines as a type of taxation meant to punish American companies.
The EU is basically, and all these other places, just free to just go to town on all the American companies and do whatever you want.
And it gets even worse. Some of this isn't even just about exporting censorship. Some include exporting human rights abuses. The Chinese Communist Party, for example, they're carrying out operations of transnational repression, pushing its totalitarian laws outside its own borders. And some of that is even being done right here in the United States. Some of this has actually been happening for a very long time. Way back in 2014, the Chinese Communist Party's Ministry of Public Security, they launched what they call Operation Fox Hunt. That was meant to track down people accused of crimes in China. And that included sending CCP agents even here to the United States to carry out arrests, to threaten families, to even pressure the wanted individuals to kill themselves. And the same CCP government branch behind that, they've actually expanded other programs. The Ministry of Public Security in China has now been establishing secret Chinese police stations, and these have been found operating in Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, in fact, a lot of American cities. In May 2026, in fact, a man was convicted for helping run a secret Chinese police station in New York on behalf of the CCP. And despite some consequences, the CCP is actually expanding its programs on this front. July 1st, 2026, the CCP rolled out its so-called Law on Promoting Ethnic Unity and Progress. Basically, the regime is saying that anything that undermines what they call ethnic unity or creates, quote, ethnic division is illegal. And they're crushing anything, basically, that deviates from a singular CCP-led identity. Now, it represents an even deeper crackdown on traits like Tibetan identity, and a lot of others as well. Standing for issues like Taiwanese independence, that's now illegal, Hong Kong rights, off the table, and even more serious, the CCP claims that this very broad law has jurisdiction over individuals and organizations outside of China. That includes even openly activists, journalists, academics, and others, even here in the United States. But it's actually not even just individual countries doing this. Some forms of globalist law are being pushed by international organizations. There's Interpol, for example, the international police. The problem is the CCP has been able to influence the organization and use Interpol as yet another tool of transnational repression. Part of this actually goes back to 2018. At the time, the president of Interpol was Meng Hongwei. He's a Chinese national. Now look, normally when you lead a United Nations organization, you're supposed to set aside national allegiances. And it's widely believed he was punished by the CCP for doing that. Reports showed he had not been fully weaponizing Interpol on the CCP's behalf. They were requesting he go after dissidents like Dolkun Issa, for example, who has criticized the CCP's persecution of Uyghurs, and others as well. So what the CCP did, they pulled out a tool they use very often, where they accuse any person they want to purge of being corrupt. Meng Hongwei was sentenced to over 13 years in prison in 2020 in China before he disappeared. And since then, well, the CCP has been openly working to gain control over Interpol. It actually almost did so a few years back when it was pushing a CCP official, that's Hu Bin-chen, to lead Interpol. A group of 50 parliamentarians from 20 countries actually spoke out against it and said his election to the body would be yet another move by the PRC to gain influence over the global policing body, and that his election could lead to Interpol being used as a vehicle for the PRC's government repressive policies. Now, Hu Bin-chen ended up not getting the position, but the CCP isn't backing off either. It doesn't end there. A November 2025 congressional report states that officials with the CCP have, quote, also exploited Interpol's Red Notice system to pursue dissidents and exiled critics abroad, blurring the line, it says, between legitimate law enforcement and transnational repression. And while Interpol can target people all throughout the world, another globalist organization is also being accused of working as yet another vehicle of globalist law, potentially on an even broader scale. That's the International Criminal Court. Now, back to this increasing push for globalist law. One of the biggest pieces of this could be the International Criminal Court. Look, the ICC is not really controlled by any one country. Technically, it's governed by 125 state parties, but the globalist organization is actually running into some major pushback. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced on July 14th, the United States is launching a massive campaign to dismantle the International Criminal Court brick by brick if necessary. And this will include visa revocations of ICC personnel, sanctions on the ICC and its affiliates, pressure on even host countries, and a long list of other actions. It's what they call a whole-of-government response, according to the State Department. And the basis of this campaign is actually really serious.
As we speak, the ICC and its friends are waging a war against our country, not with bullets or missiles, but with statutes, and compacts, and the force of so-called international law.
Now look, imagine that. A war being waged against our country using weaponized law. Lawfare, they call it. Now, the details on exactly what happened to justify this pushback from the United States is not being fully publicly stated. But a media note from the State Department says this, quote, "The ICC poses an intolerable threat to U.S. sovereignty. It claims the authority to prosecute and even imprison American servicemen and officials operating on behalf of America's national interest." It even notes that already, the ICC opened investigations into American troops, intelligence officers, and still hasn't closed those cases. Now, they don't detail what cases these are, but I'd assume they're referring to the ICC launching a campaign against the United States back in the early 2000s. They wanted to prosecute Americans, including our troops, for the role in wars or military operations. And what that did is that prompted the United States to pass the American Service Members Protection Act in 2002. Basically, what that does, it protects Americans and U.S. allies from being detained or imprisoned by or even at the request of the International Criminal Court. But despite that, look, the ICC never dropped that investigation. It's actually still going on. And the ICC even opened another investigation in 2020. And that was into U.S. troops for potential war crimes in Afghanistan, although they haven't moved on the case since 2021. But more recently, something else happened. The ICC launched a campaign to investigate Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for alleged war crimes over the war in Gaza. That prompted President Donald Trump to impose sanctions on the ICC in February 2025. Though that also did not stop the ICC case. They still have the case going on. And in his recent announcement, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the ICC could potentially also prosecute Border Patrol agents, raising the risk that Americans could face criminal charges internationally for doing their jobs under American law. But it also gets bigger than this. Not long ago, there was chatter the ICC could launch a campaign to prosecute even President Donald Trump himself and those around him. Look at this. December 2025, the United States threatened to sanction the ICC even further unless the organization pledged to not prosecute Trump and other top U.S. officials when they leave office. An unnamed Trump official told Reuters there is growing concern that in 2029, the ICC will turn its attention to the president, to the vice president, to the secretary of war and others, and pursue prosecutions against them. Now, this official added, that is unacceptable and we will not allow it to happen. And it certainly does seem now that, well, they're actually pretty set on not letting that happen. The State Department, through this new initiative, is working to dismantle the ICC in every way it can. And it seems this pushback is also focusing on other pillars of globalist law. Even with censorship coming out of Europe, for example, the Trump administration barred 5 key figures from entering the United States for their actions. It's even pressuring governments to drop their policies targeting and fining Americans. Now, it's not clear whether this is going to be enough to stop these globalist legal systems. That really hinges on whether Trump and his admin can do enough to hamstring these organizations before his term ends. And after that, well, we'll see whether the next president continues to resist or dismantle these globalist legal systems, or whether they decide to sit back and watch it all carry out with its agendas. But regardless, what we're now seeing is a threat of an emerging global legal system not voted in by Americans, but exerting authority over Americans, and people everywhere for that matter. It's a system of law outside of national law. And some are otherwise friendly states. Others are foreign tyrants actively trying to turn their human rights abuses into global campaigns. And if this is not stopped, we do face a dystopian reality that the lowest common denominator on human rights will become the baseline. The worst abuser will set the standard on the law everywhere. But what do you think? Is the threat of globalist law really so bad? If so, well, is enough being done to stop it? Let me know your thoughts in the chat. And until next time, this is the Josh Phillips Show.